Welcome everyone to today's Dharma study. So the point of this little exercise is just to make clear that the self is conditional. So most of us go through our lives living with this idea that we are our bodies and that we need to protect our bodies and the bodies of the people we love, and or not only protect, but even make it more comfortable, to really try to make it so that our surroundings support us in as best the way as possible. And this is completely cool. This is exactly what we're supposed to be doing, except when it starts taking away from other people. So that's the big problem. So then from preserving the self, preserving the relationship, it very quickly turns into selfishness, right? So that's the line that we're, could you mute? That's the line that we're trying to explore. The difference between selflessness, that is the bodhisattva way, and selfishness. And exactly how are those two related? Why shouldn't we just affirm the self? Why shouldn't we just assume that even though the self is conditional, that we should affirm it to the best of our ability, right? So why is the bodhisattva path a better way to live for the world and for ourselves? So I want to go over what we talked about last time. And of course, it was all about the Tathagata, the Buddha, exploring what is meant by the Buddha to the best of our ability. Of course, there's no way we can define Buddha, or even if you want to call it God, if that's a better word for you, or the absolute, whatever you want to call it, the mystery behind existence. It has a million names and no real way to define it. Here we are, and nobody knows exactly why or how. But in our tradition, which is the Nyorai Zen tradition, by the way, Tathagata is the Sanskrit word, Nyorai is the Japanese word, and it's just another name for Buddha. But what's so interesting about Tathagata and Tathagata, or Nyorai and Yoko, which is the Japanese versions of that, is that it means thus gone. Tathagata is thus gone, and Tathagata is thus come. Now, why would the Buddha describe himself as thus gone and thus come? You wouldn't think that there's too many prophets or religious figures who would define themselves using such a term, or even want themselves to be called such a thing, right? So, but yet, I tried to show last time how in Zen it's not about believing in a person, believing in a quality or dimension. It's about looking and seeing how this thing functions, how we experience the world, and how the world experiences itself. Tathagata, thus gone. Remember the gone. Why is the guest and expansion associated with gone, right? Because when something's gone, it starts somewhere and it's gone, right? So this was the expansive principle. And Tathagata, thus come. So this is, starting here and then compressing down. It's coming and embracing, right? And so this is the host, or the contractive activity. So of course, we talked about guest and host, how in the old Zen literature, this is really what we see. We don't typically see Tathagata associated with guest and Tathagata associated with host. And what I'm suggesting and what I'm assuming, and I don't know for sure, is that in my teacher's tradition, this philosophical tradition was handed down. Because then this idea of guest and host and coming and going, it all begins to make a lot more sense. And once it's reduced to such an abstract, it's able to be applied to more and more different circumstances, right? Okay, so we talked about this model of the Trikaya, the three bodies of Buddha. If we're going to try to make sense of this, the best possible way to do that would be this model here, or I won't say the best, but a very effective way to do it is the Trikaya, the three bodies of the Buddha. And the three bodies are the Dharmakaya, which roughly corresponds to unity, Sambhogakaya, which roughly corresponds to diversity, and then Nirmanakaya, which corresponds to change. Now, this presentation is going to parse this and define these more clearly, because right now it's just all unity is Dharmakaya, all diversity is Sambhogakaya, but it's not so simple, unfortunately. Any questions about any of this? Okay, so I gave you the example of an apple, and how this apple is a wonderful special apple in that it's both cut in half and not cut in half at the same time. And yet we as halves of the apple, right? We're all parts. We're all incomplete, right? None of us is everything, at least consciously. We can only perceive ourselves incompletely. An incomplete perspective can only perceive an incomplete perspective. We can't see the whole thing at once. And so we typically we ignore it, or we just assume that it's not even there, or we explain it away by reducing it to parts, that these parts are smaller, and these parts are made of these parts and these parts, all the way down to the bottom, where we don't have an explanation, right? We just assume that there was this place that, if you wanted to say Big Bang, it could be anything, but okay, what started the Big Bang? Okay, that's the big question. But however it is, we have this interesting experience. You can also call it this idea of Buddha or Tathagata, that something is simultaneously divided, but also not divided at the same time. Okay, so we talked about the universe being one turning, combined into one universe. The unity cannot be seen, cannot be grasped. Diversity cannot be seen or grasped. So neither one of them can be grasped directly. It's only indirectly that we can see something, right? So I in this bell, I can only perceive the diversity of this bell after some time has happened, some relationship has happened between us that allows me to gain a perspective on this bell. And we talked about this non-local relationship, this what do we call it? Space-like separation between ourselves and the sun, right? So there's some truth behind the idea of everything not only being one and ungraspable, right? We can't see unity, but also we can't also see diversity directly. We can't see this. We have no idea what's happening with the sun right now. None. It's impossible. And yet, somehow something's being shared there, right? And is that, you can't even say whether it's really an expression of unity or diversity, right? Is it one system or is it two systems? It all depends on, who you are, how fast you're going, how big you are, all these things. It's all relative. That's what I'm saying, is that this idea of diversity, this is what I'm getting at with Sambhogakaya. So Sambhogakaya is not only the diversity of zero, of Nyorai, remember, because if you look here, we know that it's not scattered mind. But remember, we talked about the source, right? This is where we talked about plus and minus, polarized, unified, polarized, unified, polarized, unified. And then they overlapped. Remember from last time? Anybody not remember that? So here we talked about saying that using a circle and its center to express unity, contraction and expansion. Remember that? So we started at a point, right? So thus gone. It expands, right? And contraction starts out, and it does come. It's coming, right? They meet at a certain point. and then that's enough. Then they go back to their homes, right? And then so this is a particular relationship, something that's coming along. So I use the example of banging on a sheet of metal, right? So the hammer and the metal come together, then they go back apart. Then you pull the hammer back, the metal also is separated. They bang again, and then they come apart. They bang again, but this time the hammer goes through the metal, right? So it gets confusing here because, of course, each one of these is also its own complete action, right? Its own complete space. It's creating what we call jonetsu, friction, which just means preliminary relativity, or something before the thing you want to focus on. It always has preliminary expressions, right, to get there. That may be a little confusing, but just to say let's just think of it as friction. So these two things are coming together, and then there's going to be a point where, boom, the hammer goes through the metal, and the metal goes through the hammer, so to speak, right? From the metal's perspective, right? And something new is created, right? You get this hole created between them. A new space is born between those two things. And it's a completely new kind of space. It's no longer the space that's just separating the hammer and the metal in the same way. No, now the hammer is through. It's looking at the metal from the opposite side. They've switched places, right? So that's a new relationship, a new kind of relative relation between them. And you could say that whole is the child of the hammer and the metal. Right? That's another way of looking at it that might be easier to grasp. Right? So we talked about here.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So in your diagram and with your example, what is the self?
We're getting there. So the self would be the whole that's formed.
That would be the.
That's
but
formed.
You said at the beginning that was conditional.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So you expect that to change, and also what I don't understand is you said that unity cannot be grasped.
Yeah.
As well as diversity.
Yes.
So in your diagram, what can I possibly understand from that process? Let's say if I cannot grasp it.
Right. Ultimate. So we can understand there's a whole world of relativity. That's where we're getting to with consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So consciousness, basically, to get to the punchline of this whole talk, consciousness it's a whole extra layer that's laid on this fundamental activity of Buddha, right? So, but this is what the lecture is about. So we're gonna start with this, right? So right now we've gotten to the point where we've created a material relativity. I'm trying to get you to see or understand how material relativity is related to this non-relative activity. So when these two things, it's very simple. So when a man and woman, before they have a child, they're just male and female. Their roles, their identity, that relationship of mother, father, and child doesn't exist, right? It's just male and female, right? So there is no relativity there, and yet it exists, right? But it's in a way that's non-relative to a child. Well, what I'm saying quite simply is that everything, our perspective, is always as a child. So what was the child's perspective before it was born? This is a famous Zen koan. Show me your face before you were born, right? So what is that? What I'm suggesting is it's this. So this idea of this foundation, this home, this source from which all relativity depends, is born and decays back into, and yet is also simultaneously nothing but it. Yeah.
The hammer is knocking on the metal. There's a sound. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when the hammer goes through the metal, and
Yeah.
the metal goes through the hammer,
Yeah.
is this the point where, I don't know, the silence occurs?
Remember, it's all silence. The whole damn thing is silence. If we remember that both polarity and unity cannot be known. Right? So remember, the apple is both divided, completely, always divided and always unified. So both polarity and unity are zero, are the Buddha. So the Dharmakaya, and in meditative practice, in advanced Zen practice, you learn about the two different kinds of samadhi. These are two different insights that you get during koan study. One is the samadhi of zero, of what my teacher divided, he used to call them, one was salvation and the other liberation. So liberation is unity. So and this is also in the Teisho. I think you guys may have seen it in the Teisho. Liberation is when you're completely free from all diversity. You and the surroundings become one, liberated from boundaries completely. Salvation is when you have the experience of you and boundaries completely being the same, utterly pure, nothing but this activity of oneness expressing, it's the activity of oneness expressed as boundaries. Does that make sense? So everything right now, the universe is completely 100% affirming, right? Doesn't matter what you think. Doesn't matter what you like or what you don't like, where you want to be, where you don't want to be, all your karma. It doesn't matter. This is given 100% in every single relationship. It's perfect and silent, like a sun burning in outer space. It's utterly silent. We think, oh, it's got to be loud and blah, blah. It's completely silent. That's power. This entire universe is silent, right? It's just what it is, right? Always changing, always one, and always diverse. And there's nothing we can do about it. There's no way we can get our head around it because we can't get out of our perspective of our relative perspective. We are relativity. You know? But look at rocks, right? Rocks are also relative, right? And we're also relative. So rocks come from this exact same process, right? And humans. So what's the difference? That's what this talk is going to hopefully get to. I'm not sure. You may just touch on it. Okay. So this is very special here, right? This is the growth and decay, right, of the self, right? So this is an event in this particular way of seeing things. So it's completely based on the arising and the growth and decay, the formation and decay of a particular relative subject. Right? And every relative subject is the same. Not exactly, but I'm not going to get into that this time. So we start with the tree, but also, of course, even this source, right? Even here, it's just the same activity. So this idea of taking the position of the relative, that's provisional, right? Ultimately, this and this are identical. That is to say, there's nothing but the source functioning as relativity as well, right? So there's three functions now. We've got the alternation between diversity and unity. So one is polarity, and two is unity. So that's the Dharmakaya. That's the true Dharmakaya. Diversity and polarity and unity inseparably linked, right? The only way we can get a picture of that is from some relative position, right? And then we can turn this into a linear action. But until we get some relative position, this is indistinguishable. So the apple, it's divided and it's one at the same time. It's simultaneous. Okay? So this is where we get into the Sambhogakaya. So this idea of the arising of relativity. So this is why here diversity and unity, this is diversity in the Dharmakaya, and they're not separate. The Dharmakaya is polarity and unity, right? And then the Sambhogakaya is the arising of the relative. Okay? Did I lose anybody? Okay, so again, we talked about this is just another warm up for the upcoming lecture, where you can see here again. Here's the birth of the relative self, and here we have the thus come. This is mother forming our insides, and then father thus gone forming our outsides. Doing so, this is basically the man even after we're born, right? The father does the father activity, and the mother does the mother activity. Between their two activities, the child grows. And typically, we don't have to do much. All we have to do is accept. We've got an education, we have food, we have a beautiful home, all this, we just have to let it in, right? Come on, no problem. There's no will involved. Of course, there's will, but what I'm saying is that the surroundings are feeding us. They're nurturing us. We're growing because of their activity. Until the point. So here, this zero here. This is one expression of the Dharmakaya at zero. And then this would be the expression of the Dharmakaya at two, at diversity, right? So in between, this self is born, right? And both of these are zeros. So here's the zero of diversity, the zero of unity. So we're working towards the parents growing, giving everything to us until the point when they die. And then it's just, we have all of mother and all of father as our content. That's to say so what did the Buddha say when he was born? Heaven above and earth below, and I alone am the world honored. So we exist as together with inside and outside, as inside and outside, diversified, but also not separate, not able to be relativized. So this is inside and outside becoming one, right? As diverse. But then we don't stay there. We have this experience of getting completely full grown, and then we have a problem. This is where the problem comes in. Because thus come and thus gone have to do their negation of their activity. So how are they, after your mother's given everything to you and your father's given everything to you, how do you give back to mother and how do you give back to father? Because you know you can't stay there. Right? So this is the problem of the self. And this is where we ended up last week, the Bodhisattva. Non-attachment to this, non-attachment to self. Right? Everybody following that? No? It's not so easy.
So if you have, let's say, a man-child,
yeah,
that'll be self-attachment from the same point of view.
A man-child?
A man-child, like a grown-up.
Yeah,
man.
Absolutely. Or any selfishness. So selfishness would be
Any kind of attachment.
Any kind of attachment.
Okay.
So this is what's so crazy about Buddhism. No attachments. No attachments. So of course, to be living beings, we have to have some attachments, but the idea of minimizing attachments to the absolute smallest degree, right? That is necessary. And we'll get into that next.
So in that case, decay, it's important to go to unity again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because it always has to go from this, right here we are. This transitions from here. Here's the Dharmakaya again. So this is it goes polarity, unity, polarity, right? And this is complete. There's no way of telling whether something really is polarity or unity, right? Because they're all expressions in a way that, so the apple is, even though here we're showing the apple cut, of course it's also unified. And you can even think about this. If you, just on looking, you can see something and one person can see it in parts, right? And another person can see the same thing as one thing, right? So it all depends on what you're focusing on. Right? Same thing with this. I'm seeing the whole room. You're seeing the parts, but they're simultaneous. I can perceive the same experience as unified, and you can see it as separate, a bunch of little things put together. Right? So this is what's meant that they're simultaneous. They're all. That is to say, it's relative. But this activity, because of the Nirmanakaya, remember Nirmanakaya is change. There's this dynamic element involved as well that they've got to change from at least a relative perspective. So when we, as relative beings, see this, we immediately put it in a linear progression, right? Because, we immediately are here. So that means that it has to go in a particular way, right? We can only see it, it only makes sense to us, I should say, if we put it in a linear way. But even the sequence of this, you say, oh, well, I'm up here, this has got to go to that next. But if this is your starting point, then that's not what's going to happen. Like this person's starting place is completely different than the way they perceive the starting place here. So again, even the sequence of things is relative, depending on where you are, how fast you're going, what you're seeing. So, but yet we make sense of it. So how do we make sense of it? Right? And as I said, a rock doesn't need to make sense, right? But we do. But so here's how we're getting to get into this. Am I in the frame still? Hopefully I am. Maybe I gotta go over here. Okay, so this is how relativity. This is another way to understand this. A simpler way, hopefully. So we just talk circles here. So we have polarity, and then we have unity, polarity, unity, polarity again. But what I'm showing here is a little bit closer. I'm incorporating this section here, right? The in-between section where this thing is forming and growing and then shrinking and decaying, right? So what do we do with that? So here we see black and white, right? Overlapping, right? To get to here, remember we're going. This is polarity, and this is the zero at unity. But of course, there's this in-between state. That in-between state is the birth of the relatives. This is the Sambhogakaya, right? Being born together with mother and father. So, or you could call it gray, black, and white for a more simple way. So it's only here that we can get. Use the random marker. That we can get an eye, right? This is where our eye comes in. Yeah, see? There. Now this is where we can see. No place else can we see anything. And yet we can, so from this perspective, we can see, I have a left and a right, an inside and an outside, a past and a future, right? A mother and a father, however you want to do it. But it's only from this perspective. Of course, and that perspective is just a way for us to get to this, right? So, but like I said, the perspective of rocks and stones, they don't care. They see, right? You could say, but they don't care. They have no attachment whatsoever. So, but this is how we're looking at the. So here, rising in the self here, rising in the self here. You're rising and passing away of the self, right? So with each arising and passing away, it's a new self, a new self, a new self, a new self, right? And so this is how we experience time. But I want to say, this is still happening. It's still just this progression. Because these are just, well, I'll show you a little bit, but so, and it's interesting. So this is again, polarity equals zero. Unity equals zero. Polarity is zero, unity is zero, polarity is zero. Just, this is this is the foundation, this is the source. This is the face before you were born. That's there even now, right? And but it's interesting to see how this is it's just 360 degrees. So you start here. So from polarity to polarity, it's just this. It's one half. Where to go from here, to go all the way from from this, so here we have white, black, then we go to black, white, and then white, black. So to get from here to here, it takes 2 rotations, right? So here, just to go from polarity to unity, polarity to unity, polarity, no problem. It takes this takes 2 of them to get all the way over here. Right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
But you don't have 2 rotation. You have a rotation there too.
Where? Here? Yeah. No, but here the rotation is based only on unity and polarity.
Yeah.
So unity, polarity. That's the whole rotation. Doesn't matter whether it's plus or you can't really have plus or minus 0. Doesn't make sense, right? So it's plus 0, minus 0, plus 0, minus 0, plus. It's the same. So here the alternation of polarity is egal. It doesn't matter. This is the alternation between unity and polarity. This is the alternation between different states of polarity. Yeah, that's the difference. Okay, so this is not so important. It's just that the most important thing here is to show you how this relativity comes about. And this relativity is for all things.
If unity and diversity are supposed to balance, like in a human being, as I understand it, but the like living with as few attachments as possible seems like very much towards unity and not diversity, right?
No,
No?
because remember, unity and diversity ultimately are both expressions of 0. So it's not that we're trying to go to unity. We're trying to go through we're trying to manifest the Dharma. We're trying to manifest our face before we were born, remember?
Yeah.
And that is both of these. That's both of these, right? So it's both, this is the Dharmakaya, both polarity, or diversity and unity.
Yeah.
Okay. It contains both.
It contains both. This is a huge thing. It's very hard to get. But the idea that this apple is completely cut in half and completely unified. Like it's not something we know. We have in this world, right? They're objectively.
Yeah.
So in this sense, we need to be able to manifest non-attachment as polarity and non-attachment to unity. So that is to say, we need to not be attached. Some people, in meditation, they want to just disappear, right? No, there's nothing. There's just nothing, right?
Yeah.
But if you were to disappear into really nothing, you couldn't tell this from that, right? It would be just gray. Everything would just be black, or everything would be white. There's no contrast. That's when 2 things are coming together and they negate themselves as unity. Now that does happen, right? All the time. In fact, everything's negating itself through some connection right now. But that's only one side of the picture, right? And everything is also here. Everything's also continuously being affirmed and divided, right? Now we see it only from a relative perspective, and so we're able to understand it in a linear way, because here, from this eye, right? This is me. I can only see the world like this. Right? Because that's who I am. That's what I am. I can't see it from here because there's no eye. There's no eye here either.
Yeah.
So this is, like I said, there's 2 expressions of samadhi. The samadhi of perfect 0 and the samadhi of perfect polarity. It's very interesting. It's so hard. I can't believe that I'm able to make any sense of it at all. But my teacher kept going. He not literally 2.5 hours every single day for years about this. Until finally a little bit tripped in. Like, imagine 40 people hearing this every day. So that Teisha you read, right? Every time it was the same thing for years and years. So it's really interesting. So anyway, so the Dharmakaya, non-causal, non-relative, simultaneous. Okay? And then with the Sambhogakaya, it's relative, it's causal, it's linear. at least from our perspective. The world is born and the world dies. Okay, so now we're going to try to get to the difference between rocks and humans. So here we are. I've taken this thing here, this relative. Remember, this is the sun prototype, right? Here's our eyeball. This is our perspective. Okay, so, but what's interesting, of course, is that the minute that this child is born, right, it immediately, simultaneously, is manifesting as a new it and everything that's not it relation, a new relationship of perfect polarity, right? So yes, you're your parent's child, but you're also simultaneously a complete individual relative to everything that's not you, right? So this is a really cool thing, right? So we're relative, but at the same time, we have this absolute quality to ourselves. It's me and everything that's not me. And my parents are just part of that, right? So this is a new form of polarity, right? So for the rock, of course, this and it doesn't really matter. These are almost the two of the same things, because the sophistication of a rock, right? It doesn't really go beyond this. That is to say, with a rock, it just here's the rock being formed, and then there's something that happens. The inside and outside affect it somehow. Maybe it explodes from the inside, or maybe something hits it from the outside. Right? The unification, whether it is and that contact, the exploding, the fact of the minute that those boundaries are broken, right, from the outside or inside, those boundaries are broken. This is unity. So whenever the boundaries break of some relative state, that's unity. Right? And then that will resolve itself into some new shape of the rock. Right? In some really crazy sense, like the material world is really the Dharmakaya. It's manifesting its face before it was born, right? So before it's born and after it's born, from its perspective, it's the same, right? From here to here, this is almost identical.
Keegan, is that another way of saying that everything has Buddha nature?
Huh?
Is that another way of saying everything has Buddha nature?
Yes.
Yeah.
This whole thing is saying, yeah. So can you say that rocks are conscious? I don't know. What do you guys think? I think not, because I think consciousness is defined by something very special and unique that rocks don't have. Right? So there's absolutely other than the physical resistance to the outside, right? The material resistance from change, right? Rocks can't have they have no perspective apart from this. Nothing to resist outer forces other than their inner forces as they are. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so there's no life and no death. It's not alive and it's not dead, because there's no question. It's something that's not alive and not dead, because you can't say it was dead because it was never alive. Right? And so this is the material. It's purely physical. Rocks have no problems. They're completely beyond problems. Right? But we're not that way. So we have a different configuration, is what I'm trying to suggest. We have a new dimension of subjectivity. This is subjectivity A. This is subjectivity B. So for us, we have an inside and an outside that give rise to a self. It's the interaction of our inside and outside that gives rise to a special state of subjectivity. Right? So the only way we can have consciousness is through our body and our surroundings interacting in order to have this special relationship, relationship between inside and outside. Are we our bodies? No, we're not our bodies. I can look And if I were to take out any part of my body, put it on the table, or even if I were to, just take all the material constituents of my body and put it, that's not who I am. It's not what I am. Right? It's something non-physical, is what I'm trying to suggest. It's a regulatory expression. It's that which, it's the child of inside and outside, right? It's this, right? But there's a new dimension involved. So here it is, right? So to reduce this to inside and outside, we are the child of inside and outside. Or no, child of inside and outside here. But that self, right? Just like this self, just like the self of a rock, can also immediately, it is immediately polarized with everything that's not itself. So there's your consciousness and everything that's not your consciousness, right? Does everybody have that experience, right? There's my capacity to regulate my inner and outer surroundings, like to perceive, whatever you want to call it, my experience, right? And that is separate from my body or my surroundings. Because it's dependent on the interaction. It's dependent on the interaction between body and surroundings. There's nothing about me that is not dependent on my inner and outer surroundings overlapping.
Can you elaborate a bit on regulate?
Well, we'll get to that. Regulate. There's a lot of different ways to talk about that. What I'm trying to say is that it's not physical. It's non-physical. So this self, this consciousness, it's not physical. It's not the chemical makeup of your brain, right? It's not that. It's something more. It's a relational. Why? Because because it has the capacity to. Getting to this in the next thing, it has the capacity to project subjectivity. That's the big difference.
But may I also ask, why do you call this subjectivity the rock?
Well, because it has a past and future. It has an inside and an outside. It has it has a mother and a father, if you will. It has the circumstances, the conditions that gave rise to it. Maybe it's tectonic plates, right? Maybe it's two things falling, one thing falling on another. Maybe it's something that happens in the middle of a sun when gold is formed. But there's these two things that come together, and their interaction is this. So a rock is the product of some interaction.
I wonder because actually when you say subjectivity comes in our language objectivity. And
Yes.
here it's getting confusing in our language
Yeah, yeah.
because we call it as an object.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That was the same thing with my teacher. He would also use it. So it's tricky. But what I mean by with relative subjectivity, you always have a subject, and let's just say you have a relative context, and that context is bifurcated. So here, remember, so here we have no subject, no object. That is to say, it's just polarity, right? Here, the subject is formed, and rather than calling the subject an object, right? The object, I'm saying that where I'm going to go with this is that we project that. That's provisional. When we say, oh, that the microphone is the subject and everything else is the object. That's me projecting subjectivity, right? So fundamentally, so we're talking not about that. We're talking about the physical reality of it, right? So everything is a subject, and it's got a bifurcated context. Why? Because it came from these two conditional inverses. And then, part of each conditional inverse is creating that subject, which means that this subjectivity here is incomplete, and its surroundings is also incomplete. Because mother and father, let's just say male and female, have given some of themselves in order to create the relative state. So the whole situation here is one of relativity. Yeah? But anyway, yeah, so we're talking, so right now I'm trying to distinguish between the physical expressions, which is no life, no death, it's purely material, and the non-physical or regulatory, and this always involves life or death, right? So this relationship here always is contingent upon the preservation of life and death, those two alternatives. Okay, back to this board. Okay, so what I suggested is that this is a new dimension of subjectivity here, right? We have inside and outside. So this becomes our new parents, the new context from within which the self is created. Right? And so what this self needs to do is to maintain this equilibrium, because this relationship, that is to say the self, the conscious self, I'll call it, completely depends on the relationship between inside and outside being stable, being maintained. Somebody comes and puts a knife in me, that relationship is broken. And my body and mind, my body and surroundings won't be able to generate my consciousness, right? My consciousness will be gone or change in a certain way. And so the whole job of the self, what I'm suggesting, from the simplest expression of biological life to the most complex, is one of regulation. It's regulating, maintaining that relationship between inside and outside, right? Not to directly reaffirm, not directly bring about its own survival, but to indirectly bring about its own survival by maintaining the relationship between inside and outside, right? We can't make ourselves exist from one moment to the next, right? All we can do is make sure our body and surroundings are doing what they need to do in order to keep them making me this moment and this moment and this moment, right? So this idea of the self as regulation is what I mean in this sense as consciousness. So this idea, the very action of regulating this inside and outside in order to create something whose action perpetuates its original relationship. Nothing else does this except living beings.
Now, you're pointing there that you have stable equilibrium outside and inside,
Yeah.
not in the middle.
Well, the stable equilibrium between inside and outside keeps the self going. The self can't keep itself going, right? I can't make my blood go. I can't make my brain work. I can't make all the synapses fire. All I can do is to make sure
The
that
self is not stable.
the self. Well, I mean, it's relativity, relatively stable. We're trying to maintain this relationship so that this one continues. And so this is interesting. So in this way of looking at things, viruses are alive, right? Because what do? They have an inside, and their action gives rise to some relationship, right, between inside and outside. That's whose main function is to perpetuate its own conditions for survival. So it does regulate, right? There's no question that a virus regulates its surroundings, its inner and outer surroundings, in order to survive. It's that simple. Okay, so what I'm trying to suggest is that there's a way to divide this idea of regulation and non-regulation, right? No life, no death, purely material. And we could call this intrinsic information and extrinsic information. But intrinsic information is physical processes without projection. Okay, so the bare physical processes that we have no ability to change with our conscious actions, right? So everything, all the material sciences, basically, right? It's just everything functioning in a way that is not dependent on consciousness. Yeah? And then extrinsic information is just the opposite. It's everything that we have projected subjectivity onto, right? And so this, I put Dharmakaya here because this is unknowable, right? We can never know anything, know nothing, unless we project subjectivity onto it, right? There's no way we can we can see something, make an object of something from this total field, unless we project subjectivity onto it. Does everybody see that? That's an important point.
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. So intrinsic information is just the physical processes without projection of any kind, without mental projection of any kind, or I should say, without regulation of any kind. Let's put it that way. So without non-physical regulation, right? But this, and then extrinsic information is everything that's brought about through regulation. Yeah.
This is a very interesting point in the way that there are scientists who believe only in physical processes, and they think that humans are just physical processes,
Yeah.
that consciousness is no will, it's a reductionist materialist standpoint,
Yeah.
but that means we are just that, physical processes without projection.
Right.
Yeah? So if you say we cannot know it, it means this is what we are. So I wonder if this is true, if our introspection can get so deep that we get to that level of our being.
You mean this level?
Yes,
Well,
because that's what we.
Well, this is again the koan. How do you manifest your face before your parents were born? Right. The problem is that we're all caught in our projections. That's the problem. But I'm hoping that this is a little helpful. It was helpful for me to figure out what projections are in the first place. Right. So where do they come from, and why are we caught in them? Right. So, and I think this is why it's important to try to understand consciousness, like from an intellectual point of view. Yeah.
Is it the point of a haiku, because a haiku is a haiku is not projection. It's the haiku is written when there's when there's no.
Well, no, that's subjective, because there are some beautiful haiku about a feeling or a simple experience, like a beautiful woman turned and a butterfly flew from her shoulder, something, stuff like that, where they are based on projections. But that's getting very close to where we need to go, because there is a place where those two come together. Like I said, this is always the case, right? No matter what projection, even projections do this, so that our thoughts, there's a thought and everything that's not that thought, right? So this is always happening. It's just that consciousness is this turning point. It's like a prism, right? It's like this prism where the material comes in, right? And then this whole unbeknownst rainbow is formed from this whole new form of relativity is formed out of this, what was once unified expression. Now, everything we need to create castles and princesses and knights and all of this stuff comes in, right, from this source, from this, it's all inherent in this, but it takes consciousness, it takes this is the prism that creates this rainbow. It's a new dimension of reality, right? Like all of this stuff, rooms, buildings, all this stuff, it's all projection that we've created from, but to have a projection, something has to come in. It doesn't come out of nowhere, right? So we're processing all of this, right, in a way that's completely unique and new. And so this is why I don't say, I take issue with the idea from people who say that rocks are conscious and this. Yes, everything in some level is conscious, and that everything is equally participating in the activity of the Buddha and the Dharma activity, right? But there's a big difference between us and rocks, or even single cells and rocks, right? And what I'm suggesting is that it's this regulation. Inside, outside, this whole new creation of opposites. It's a new dimension in subjectivity. Okay, so intrinsic, this is extrinsic information is projections. Intrinsic information is just the physical processes. So this is not needed for consciousness. or I should say unconscious or non-consciousness. And this is needed for consciousness. It is consciousness.
So I have a question because maybe I don't understand this, but for instance, if we take sound, which is a wave, so you can measure it.
Yeah.
But that'll be an extrinsic info, right? The measurement, the intrinsic one would be the wave itself. I mean, the phenomenon itself.
The phenomenon itself, exactly. So, but ultimately, like I said, that phenomenon is relative. Like any perception you have of that, calling even it a phenomenon is projection.
How do you describe the phenomena with mathematics or some language? You are putting some information.
But even to say it's this as opposed to not that, you've already projected.
Yeah. May I be again cautious with words? Phenomenon means the experience of something.
Yeah.
It's in the Western philosophy. So if you talk about the wave as the phenomenon, then you talk already from our conscious experience of, and what we were referring to was not the phenomenon, but the physical process.
Yeah, but the physical process is a projection.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm just.
You're talking about
Why I'm doing that, why I'm saying that with the language, a lot of confusion comes because we transfer concepts from Western language on this kind of teaching and the other way around, and then we get totally lost in translation.
Yeah.
Conceptual.
And this
And in physics, we use phenomenon.
I know, but it is.
That's a physical process.
I do understand.
But that was my point.
yeah. But so I think this is interesting because it's like it's where yeah, because we take phenomenon as a given, like a starting place, right? There are phenomena, but that's not necessarily just a given.
Exactly. That's not.
It reminds me of that question that it says, so if there's a tree falling, but nobody's there, so what is the sound that it makes?
Exactly. But what's interesting is of course,
Or does it make a sound at all?
but there's always something there to hear it, right? Like there's always this relational thing is happening everywhere, except that this is a rock, this one this is a tree, this is a rock, this is a bug, doesn't matter whether we're not there to hear it. Something is always there to hear it, right? So by hearing I mean be affected by this, by the interaction between the tree and its surroundings. So it's really so simple, but it's so hard at the same time. It's very interesting, at least for me. Okay, what time have we got?
It's 1 hour and 6 minutes on the camera here.
How about a break? Yeah, we have some water with gas in there that we can all have.
Great.
Stop this.